Hi everybody and welcome to Geektube Central and our Game of Thrones Season 6 review, and here we are at the penultimate episode of the season, the Battle of the Bastards. Now obviously I'm going in and I'm going to be reviewing it, but I'm just going to give a quick few words on what I thought of the episode. I thought it was amazing. I loved the fact that two of my favourite houses were the main focus. It was the fire of the Targaryens and the ice of the Starks, and I'm really pleased with how the episode went, and I can't wait to go into detail. So we start off with the first half of our review focusing on Meereen and what's happening with House Targaryen. And it's very much fire and blood. The city is being bombarded by these fiery bombards being catapulted from the ships, and you actually see it from that vantage point. And you see Daenerys is watching this, and obviously she's not happy with how things have ended up since she's been gone. And Tyrion explains, well, everything was going well. The people were on your side, commerce was doing well, and obviously they've shown up, but there's a reason for it. They don't want us to do well, because if we're doing well and we have no masters, then why would the people in their cities need masters? And so basically they're taking it out on us and they're trying to make an example. And she seems appeased by that and she says, good, let's proceed. And she wants, in her own opinion, to just kill the masters and all the soldiers, burn their fleet and return their cities to the dirt. And as much as it sounds appealing, it's kind of indiscriminate and a lot of people will get killed, and that's what Tyrion brings up. And he also says, that's like your father. Your father had that plan for King's Landing. He had wildfire under the Red Keep, the guild halls, the Great Sept of Baelor and all the thoroughfares, and he would have ruined everything, and Jaime told me that. Now I think we're hearing about that because it's also foreshadowing for next week. And as you see one of the bombards break one of the windows that in the room they're in, you kind of understand that something needs to happen, and what they decide to do is to meet with the masters on the outskirts of the city. And as both parties meet on the outskirts of Meereen, they have a small retinue of soldiers on each side, but the masters from the off are thinking they're in the power, and they insult her by calling her the beggar queen and how she should have just took their offer of peace yonks ago when they offered it. Instead, she's just going to leave on foot. They're going to take back the Unsullied, they're going to take back Melisandre, they're going to be returned to Krasnus, that guy that she stole them from. Essentially she did, and that they were going to slaughter the dragons. Now that is just, ooh, that ground my gear something awful. And when it cuts to them all watching, they're not as tense as you think they would be over this sort of threatening manner. They think they hold the power, and all the while Daenerys is like, oh, you misunderstand me, we're not here for our terms of surrender, we're here for yours. And of course that middle guy here, I forget his name, he just says, oh, it must be really hard to adjust yourself to the new reality, but you will. And in the background you see Drogon, and he comes flying in, and the music starts to swell, and the music that you remember so well from when Daenerys came out of the smoke and the dragons were born, and the music starts to swell. She climbs on Drogon and starts to fly over the city. And even though we don't see how the power is so strong that Viserion and Rhaegal even manage to bust their way out of the from where they're being kept, and they join Daenerys with Drogon in the sky. It then cuts to the Sons of the Harpy on the ground killing a whole bunch of Meereenese people, and then you hear the screaming, and from the minute I heard the screaming I was like, that's Dothraki screamers. And on a massive horde of them, the horde that they are, with Daenerys Naharis, him breathing his own arak, and they just come along and they're lopping heads off people, and you're like, there you go, by air and by ground they've got this power. And Drogon, Viserion and Rhaegal, they all set fire to this one ship. They just keep blasting it and blasting it. The ship even starts to break apart. People are on fire. And as this is happening, the other fleet, the rest of the fleet, they're not even hanging about. They just jump ship. So all they had to do was destroy one ship, and that is what brought the masters to their knees. So we have this power shift between the masters and to Daenerys' people. Grey Worm challenges the master soldiers and said, would you die for them even though they wouldn't die for you? If not, you can go home. The soldiers then leave, and Tyrion thanks them for the ships. And Tyrion states it plain. You're in a lot of trouble. We had a deal and you reneged on your deal, and you know the Queen won't forgive that. And that's when Melisandre says, the Queen demands that one of you must die. And of course at this point they start to panic. They push one of the ones that they deem lowborn, and they say, oh, take him, he's alright, he's lowborn, he's not really one of us, he doesn't speak for us. And he bends down and he's begging, please don't kill me. And Grey Worm, as quick as you like, he unsheathes the dagger and he slices in one action and he kills both on either side of the one in the middle. And Tyrion comes up to him and says, by the grace of Her Majesty you live. Tell your people what happened here and tell them what happened when the dragons came to Meereen. So basically that guy is shit in a brick. And what's really lovely is while he's stood there abandoned by the soldiers and by his people, you see the dragons flying in the background in a jubilant sort of dance of dragons. We move on to Tyrion addressing Theon Greyjoy, and he says, it's been a while since I saw you last at Winterfell, and back then you were going on about my height, about a man of my stature, and basically how you're just one of many that like to pick on my height and use the same five jokes. And he says, you know what, how has things fared for you since I last saw you? Obviously not well. Look what you've went and resorted to, killing the Stark boys. And of course Theon isn't weak anymore and admits, I didn't do that, I didn't kill them, but I did things just as bad. Which I think was a good way to open it. He was always going to come humble to the situation. And it's then Daenerys wants to know why they're there. And they say, we're going to pledge our ships to you if you'll support our claim for the Iron Islands. But there's a problem. My uncle who usurped us, and Daenerys knows all about usurping, he wants to kill us and he wants to come here and offer his big cock to you. But he doesn't believe in women rulers, and that's the reason why we had to leave. But they both, in a way, bond over the fact that they both had terrible fathers who were terrible rulers, and that even though they look like really good rulers, people really don't have faith in them. And there's a kind of flirtatious moment, and in the end, Daenerys agrees that they'll join forces, they can take back the Iron Islands and they don't need to be part of the Seven Kingdoms, but they can't rape and steal anymore. And in the end, Yara looks to her brother for advice, just the same as Daenerys and Tyrion, and they agree to join forces as long as she won't, as the ruler of the Iron Islands, because Theon rightly gave up his claim, that she'll never attack the Seven Kingdoms. And it seems like a really fair trade, because she'll be able to give back to the Iron Islanders what no king had done before her since Aegon's Landing, was to have the Iron Islands be independent. And you just get this feeling when Yara puts out her hand to her, and Daenerys isn't used to this custom, and they grip arms like you see here, and you realise that it's a strong partnership they're creating and they're gripping on tight, and I have really good high hopes for this. And it's a good way to end those scenes, considering how we started off, so I really enjoyed that scene with Tyrion and Theon. I liked the partnerships between both sides and how they came together. And now we're going to move on to the juicy bit of the episode, the Battle of the Bastards. So as we return to the north, just outside Winterfell, Jon and Sansa and their people come to meet Ramsay, and Ramsay comes with his people and obviously Umber and Karstark, the traitors. And he says to her, you don't have to be here. But of course she's going to come, Sansa isn't going to miss this. And when Ramsay arrives with these assholes with him, the first thing he says is, Sansa, my beautiful wife. And it's kind of like his way of dismissing how serious it is. He just assumes that he's been brought his wife, that if Jon kneels down before him, renounces himself, gives up his army, he might just forgive all the so-called traitors. And he just takes great pains to keep calling him a bastard throughout this whole thing. And obviously Ramsay thinks he's winning, and it cuts to my favourite part is when it cuts to little lady Lyanna Mormont, who's there as well, because she's not going to miss it, because she's got men in her fight. She might have just 62 men, but they're powerful guys. And as he's talking, she's giving serious shade, and I loved every bit of it. And when Ramsay keeps going on about the fact that they're traitors, that they don't have the men, and that you might as well just give up now. And quite rightly, it looks that way. He does have 6,000 men, but Jon says, aye, you probably will, you've got the numbers. But, thousands of our men don't have to die. Only one of us. And he says, how about we do this the old way? You and me against each other. And of course Ramsay's never going to accept that. He says, no, I've heard you're the best fighter that could have ever lived. He says, why am I going to do that? Because my army will beat yours. And anyway, don't you want to save your brother? And Sansa's like, how do we even know you've got him? And they throw over Shaggy Dog's head. And Sansa's quite cold and almost Ramsay-like, and she just says, you're going to die tomorrow, Lord Bolton. Sleep well. And she rides off, right? And Ramsay says, oh, she's your sister, she's some woman. But you know what? My dogs haven't eaten 7 days, and they might enjoy eating your eyes or your balls. And I just want to take note of the fact that Sansa brings this up later, even though she wasn't there. I'm going to let it slide because obviously after they regroup afterwards, she probably asked them, what did Ramsay say after I left? And they probably just informed her about the whole thing about the dog. So we'll let that slide. We then move on to the War Council meeting where Jon and Sir Davos are explaining to Tormund how they want to have Ramsay and his forces come towards them. They have trenches either side. They hope to catch them in a pincer movement. And it's really funny seeing that Tormund doesn't know anything about that. But even Tormund's like, we need some sort of help because they will have a lot more horses and they will just cut right through us. And obviously he's right and they agree on it. And Sansa's standing at the side and she's not really been in on the negotiations because obviously maybe in fighting she doesn't know anything. But she knows about Ramsay and I think she feels that she's being ignored and she has something to give. I mean, she calls Jon out for not really being ready, that they should have had more people to get involved in this, more men, and she admits that, yes, you probably got more experience than he has in fighting, and even me compared to me because I'm a girl, but he's the one that sets traps. And we're never going to get Rickon back. He's already dead, basically, because he's the only true-born son, and we're worthless compared to that. He'll never let him live. And you know what? As much as he tries to say that I'll protect you, Sansa, no one can really protect me, she says. And you kind of understand that, but I kind of think that, yeah, she could have put this a better way instead of kind of naysaying her brother. And it's like, please, don't down the morale. I mean, they knew that the odds weren't great, but it doesn't help being picked on in a way. But Sansa does have some points. We then have this nice interaction between Sir Davos and Tormund, where they both talk about how they thought they were fighting for their king and that they were the right person to take them into the wars ahead. But both of them fell, and basically alluding that Jon is the right person to be fighting for. And there's this really funny bit where Sir Davos is using metaphors about demons in Stannis' skull, and obviously Tormund doesn't understand that, and I like that kind of the difference between them. But they both talk about how they like to deal with a night before a battle, and Tormund talks about drinking sour goat's milk, and Sir Davos is like, no, I just like walking because I'm shitless. And they both say their goodbyes, and you kind of get the feeling that, oh, I hope either way, whatever makes them feel better will help them in the battle ahead. The next scene covers our only real scene that we see Melisandre in, and actually her speaking. She's sitting contemplating the flames, she's got a mirror on her table, obviously this is where she thinks and everything, and it's kind of reminiscent of how sad she was when she thought all was lost when Jon was dead. And he comes in and questions why she wasn't at the War Council, and she just says plainly, I'm not a soldier. And it's in this moment of weakness, probably because of what Sansa said. He says, if I die this time, don't bring me back. And she goes on to explain that she doesn't have the power to bring him back. She only has the power to do what the Red God lets her do. And that if it's in the power to do so, she'll bring him back. And even though he's like, I'm your commander and you have to do what I say, she isn't going to do that. And he asks for one last piece of advice, and she just says, just win. And it's true, just win, and hopefully she won't need to bring you back if you die. We then move on to find that Sir Davos finds where the pyre was that killed Shireen, and we know it's that because there's the little burnt stag that he gave her. And this was something I hope that they weren't going to fling away, but this is foreshadowing for the next episode, and when he finds that, you just know that at the first opportunity, he is not going to let that lie, because it was one thing when Stannis died, he was a man and he was in control, but she was an innocent and he's not going to stand for that. And just when he's contemplating and you're thinking he's got some dark thoughts inside there, you hear the horn, and that's the start of the battle is going to be happening, and you're like, oh shit's going down, but this thing with Shireen is not over, and this has to be brought back up. We then see Jon's forces have all aligned and amassed, and Jon rides on horseback through the crowd, and he comes to the front, and obviously he's surveying the insurmountable odds he's up against, and he looks across and he obviously sees the Boltons, and it's quite tense. But then, even though we get this beautiful shot of them, and yes, they don't have the same manpower, but my god, we have a giant man, and there's this passionate there, and remember, the wildlings are nothing to be sniffing at. We then see that in amongst the land, before you get to the Bolton forces, there's lots of crucified men, and that's obviously Ramsay trying to mindfuck Jon. And then I see the bit with the rope, and I just scream at the TV, it's the baby, he's got the baby Rickon, he's got him by a rope. It says, please don't be around his neck, please don't kill him, don't hurt him like that. And then you realise that he wants to play a game. He says, do you like games, little man? And he pulls out his dagger as if he might hurt Rickon, and Rickon's being really brave, thinking he's going to die. He then cuts the ropes and tells him to run, and of course Rickon is unsure, but he runs, and he realises why he has to run, because Ramsay has his bow and arrow out, and that's what he's best at. He's not a fighter like Jon. And as Jon marches, he just totally rallies to get to his brother, and you see this whole wide expanse, and you see how far a distance it is, and Ramsay's playing with them by firing arrows, but he's firing them kind of haphazardly, he's nowhere near getting them, but it causes the tension. And as you hear the horse of Jon getting further and further near him, and you go, this is it. He even reaches out, and as he tries to reach out, almost at they're so close to each other, they can almost touch, and then all of a sudden Rickon's harpooned from the back. He lands on the ground, and with a tiny little gasp, and he dies. And you realise that this was Ramsay, just like Sansa said, he's mind fucking him, this is what he's done. And Jon surveying this, you can see him get angrier and angrier, and there's a moment where Tormund says don't, and obviously he does. Jon rides full of anger, and at that moment the Bolton forces start firing arrows, and they keep firing it, and they even harpoon him, and it's like, oh god. And I didn't really want to show this, but I just wanted to show you just how haphazard it was. And Sir Davos rallies the soldiers, and they're getting ready to charge, and as they start to charge from their side, and it's in this beautiful shot where it's all slow motion, after they start to charge, and after there's a suitable amount of arrows, Ramsay says, now it's time for our guys to charge, and they start to charge at Jon. And at this point his horse has been downed, and he's just standing there in a field. And this shot right here is not CGI, this is actually from the horsewoman trainer that done it, with all these horses. There are about 70 horses, and they come charging towards Jon, and just when you think he's going to get completely nailed by these horses, the other horses from the Stark side collide, and he's in amongst it, and he's swinging. And the reason why he looks kind of impotent and can't fight is because they're already at a charging pace. He was from standstill, and you get this moment where, Jesus Christ, he might get killed in the freaking melee in between it. And there's a moment where Sir Davos wants to let loose his arrows, but he doesn't want to hurt their men. Ramsay doesn't care at this point, he just says fire, fire, fire. And there's moments where you think Jon might get killed by the arrows, but for some reason, he doesn't. And you're like, my god. And he starts to attack the oncoming soldiers, and he's really going for it, and you see him get bloodier and bloodier, and the music is so intense, and the clashing of the horses' hooves and the bodies and everything, and you just get this really intense feeling. But then Davos, talking about his shits from earlier, says fuck it, we're just gonna run for it, and he starts to run. And then of course the freaking Umber guy, he's got his own forces to run, and he's shouting, who owns the north? And he comes barreling, and there's a moment where this headless horseman rides by, and it's hysterical, and Wun Wun, at that point, he comes to charge in, and at this point they're stuck by dead bodies behind them, and then the sides are starting to be blocked in, and the phalanx forms around them, and they're just stuck in the middle. Bear in mind, most of their horses are gone. They're literally down to most of the wildlings and most of their standing ground soldiers, and it's just this quagmire of dead bodies and blood, and you just think, this is it, this is all going to crap. And you even see from Ramsay's point of view, and he looks so proud, and Wun Wun's trying his best to fight, and as the phalanx moves forward, they just basically start picking them off, and the wildlings, I have to admit, are fantastic. They're just going for it. And as the Bolton forces move in, they're just and over the wall actually of dead bodies, Umber is coming across, so they're now attacked on 3 sides, but they're, God love them, they keep trying to move forward, and it becomes really looks really terrible, like nothing's going to happen. And Wun Wun's attacking, he's trying to get near, but he can't get near the spears, and when he did get one, he just picked him up, ripped him in half. And at that point you're like, thank God we've got Wun Wun there, but even then they start to really feel the claustrophobia when the Bolton soldiers just keep charging, killing people, they drop, they move forward. And as more of the other soldiers from behind with that Umber guy, they're piling in, and you realise that it seems almost lost, and you see Sir Davos, you see Tormund, you see Jon, they're all looking at each other, and as they're being forced in, Jon starts to get crushed by his own guys. Not their fault, it's just the way they literally is on top of each other, and you see how dark it gets for Jon inside this quagmire, and all the body starts to fill. Karstark, the Umber guy, I keep saying Karstark, he goes 1-on-1 against Tormund, and Tormund's a fantastic fighter, and it just keeps getting more claustrophobic to the point that Jon's starting to get suffocated, but he manages to pull himself up, and it reminded me of the episode where Daenerys is lifted up in Misa. And Ramsay looks really proud and looks quite pleased with himself, but if you look behind him, he's completely on his own at this point. He has bet that his guys would win, and the way it works, it was. And Tormund rips the throat out of that Umber guy, and he just starts wailing on him. And from the side you hear this horn, and everybody within the crowd with Jon looks across, and it's House Arryn, it's the Knights of the Vale, and like literally in every Western movie when they say, here comes the cavalry, and here they come, and they're proud, and they're all on horseback. And there are a large amount of them, and they just come riding across, and then you see that Sansa's there with Littlefinger, and you realise that is what she wanted, this is what she asked for. And if ever having a side deal against Jon kind of behind his back, this is when it works. And they just start to charge, and they just cut through knife through a butter, like through this phalanx, and it opens up, and it makes sure that all the soldiers from the Stark side are free, and the ones that are left are free. And that's when Tormund, Wun Wun and Jon realise that's when Ramsay's decide to fuck off, and he starts to ride back to Winterfell, and Sansa watches from this distance, and she sees those 3 running towards Winterfell, and you're like, this is it, this is the 1-on-1 we've been waiting for. And Ramsay at this point thinks, even though he's lost his army and they don't really have much in his opinion, he can just outlast them in a siege. But then as soon as he says that, you hear the banging of the door, and in busts Wun Wun. And he's being completely overwrought with all these arrows, but he still comes in and he collapses onto the ground, and he's still this strong force. And when Jon and the rest of the forces come in and they slaughter all of the Bolton soldiers, so it's just them against Ramsay that's just standing there in awe, you think to yourself, well, that's over at least. And Wun Wun looks completely worn out, and just at that moment he is shot in the eye and he dies. And I was so disappointed, I was so upset, but God bless Wun Wun, he was a trier, and Ramsay's kind of jubilant, even though he's just, he's completely cornered, he has nobody on his side, they're all dead behind him, and he's like, I've reconsidered, we'll have a fight. And there's a moment where you think Jon's forces just might harpoon him with their arrows, but no, Jon just runs at him with a shield, and Ramsay's so arrogant, he thinks he can take Jon in close combat by firing arrows at him. And as Jon takes on one arrow after another, 3 arrows are shot at him, and he manages to block it, and then he uses the shield and just whacks in Ramsay's face and knocks him to the ground. And at this point he just starts hammering away at his face, and you get all that aggression and all that anger that's been brought up. Wun Wun Rickon, his family being slaughtered, and it cuts to Ramsay's face and he's smiling because he's a sadist, right? It's even when he's down on the ground bleeding, it's like he's trying to get one over on Jon, mind fuck him by saying I'm not that bothered. And Sansa's watching, and as he pummels it, you actually think at some point he's going to start breaking his head right open. And it made me think of that scene in Sin City with the yellow bastard and his face getting smashed in. But after a while, Jon stops, and it cuts to the Bolton banners being dropped into a big pile, and finally the Stark banner is hung from the castle wall at Winterfell, right next to the engraved one, and you realise, finally, Winterfell is back with who it should be with. And Sir Davos, it cuts to him, and he's holding that little burnt stag, and you just see all the emotions in his face, and his eyes are so dead and intent on something, and you see that he's staring at Melisandre, and you're like, she's in so much trouble when he gets near her. It's obviously not going to get resolved today, but it's going to happen. She's watching as little Rickon is being brought in, and you see the blood underneath where Wun Wun died, and it's just like the savagery of it. And Jon looks at Rickon and says, take him and put him in the crypts and bury him next to my father. And you're like, at least he's home at least. And there's a moment where Sansa says to Jon just when he was walking away, where is he? And then it cuts straight to Ramsay. So we come to the end of the episode, and Ramsay is literally on the outs. And even though he's on the outs, he's still trying to mindfuck Sansa. And he even says, our time may be coming to an end, but you're not going to kill me. I'm part of you now. And you're like, oh, that's the worst thing you can say to someone who has power over you. And of course she doesn't stand for that, and she repeats the words we've always wanted to hear, the worst words to him. Your words will disappear, your house will disappear, your name will disappear, all memory of you will disappear. And that's the worst thing that could happen to Ramsay. He's the last of his house, and that's simply because he's killed everybody. He killed his father, his stepmother, his little brother. He is now completely on his own, and that's the worst thing that could happen to Ramsay Bolton, because worse than being a bastard is being a dead bastard. And in this case, he hears the growling, and that's when he realises he's in the kennels, surrounded by his dogs, and their cages are open. And at that point, he's trying his best to remain calm and says, my hounds won't harm me. And that's when Sansa says, you haven't fed them for 7 days, they're starving. And even though she wasn't there at that point in the scene when he said that, it does mean everything, because he's basically cultivated these dogs to be carnivores, and he smells like their favourite gravy. And at that moment, even though he tries to get them to sit and listen, the dog starts to lick at him and really wants to taste him, and before you know it, it just attacks his face, as you can see there, and they're snarling. And there's even a moment where you see the paws of the dog on his chest just kneading in, because he's getting right in there and he's attacking Ramsay, and they're screaming and howling from the dogs, all like ripping the flesh. And as Sansa walks away, right before the end of the shot, she smiles, and it's like that is her revenge, and she needed that revenge. And it ends on such a high, considering the losses we've had, and it's typical episode 9 stuff. We saw Rickon die, we saw Wun Wun die, we got massive battle scenes in Winterfell. We got that brilliant scenes with Daenerys, everything with her from the moment she climbed on Drogon and started to attack the fleet, that one ship, and just burning and flying around the place. And you're going, I remember saying, when I watched it, I thought this is as near as damn it as we would have got from when Aegon had his conquest. And you're like, this is just her unleashing the power, and she really only destroyed one ship and scared a whole bunch of people. And yeah, she did fry some people, but it's the fact that she only had to do that and everybody got in line. And that's the power of her will, that is the power of the dragons. And that was I love the fact that it was all about the fire and the ice. It was about the Targaryen house and the Stark houses, because if you remember from the credits, the 4 symbols you see is Stark, Targaryen, Lannister and Baratheon, and we know what's happened to the Baratheons. They're all but out. freaking the Lannisters, they're in a precarious situation, but the two best houses are the fire and ice houses, and it's actually called that from the books, and that's the main theme, hot and the cold and everything. I absolutely love this episode. I know a few people might say, oh well, it was a wee bit lacking in certain places. I've heard people say this, and I really don't get it at all. I thought it was amazing from the start. It gave me everything I wanted. I got to see lots of dragon action. I got to see a really fantastic Winterfell battle with the Battle of the Bastards at the end, and commendations to the people that did it. There was like about 500 extras. There was about 70 or 80 horses, if I'm right, and a lot of those were done on screen, not CGI. The dragons, of course, were, but there was so much work put into this episode, and it was such an epic episode on that scale. I can't fault it at all. A little niggle I had, which was the fact that Rickon didn't utter one damn word, and I thought that, just to twist the knife or maybe make it a bit more emotional, I thought he would have, as soon as he was close to Jon, he would have shouted his name, and it would have been nice. It would have been tragic because he still died, but I think I was missing that connection, although it doesn't really mean anything. That's just me nitpicking a very small thing. I think it puts us in a really good place, because what was good about episode 9, and even though it happened before with the Red Wedding, as much as it's horrific, if it ended at this point, you'd be like, but what about other stuff? You want to see the reaction to the stuff, and what will be good is next week we'll see the reaction to them finally getting Winterfell. We'll finally be able to see them in Winterfell. We won't have to wait a year for it to happen. And obviously there's some setup, the foreshadowing between Sir Davos and Melisandre for the next episode, and I can't wait for that. But next week, by all accounts, is supposed to be utterly dramatic and shocking, and I think that's mostly to do with the King's Landing scenes. And obviously from the trailer, we're going to see Cersei's trial, and I think the fact that Tyrion mentioned wildfire to Daenerys, I think that's also another foreshadowing. I think that the secret that Master Qyburn confirmed with Cersei last week was definitely about wildfire caches underneath King's Landing, and I think, considering Cersei has said from pretty much the first season all the way through that she's willing to burn cities to the ground if she has to, I think that will be what will probably happen next week. Now that's just me guessing, that's not from a spoiler that I read, but overall, let's give this a score. I don't think there's such a thing as a perfect 10 out of 10 episode. I think there's always something that you could add or whatever, and there's certain things you could change. But I would give this a definite 9.5 out of 10 with a little wiggle room. I thought that everything that was done in the episode, even the most tragic moments, were totally worth it. It all blended in. It was a bit sad that Rickon's death didn't affect me as much as I thought it would, but at least wrapping up his storyline, at least knowing what happened to him and he's back, will be nice, and at least that wraps up that storyline. He's not just out floating out there and everything. And obviously next week we're going to get our final scenes with Bran for the season, and by all accounts we are going to get a flashback. It will carry on from one we wanted before, the Tower of Joy scene by all accounts, and I'm 95% sure that we're going to get a confirmation on Jon's origin, and I hope that's not too spoilery for people. But I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Thanks for bearing with me. I take way too long doing these episodes, these reviews and everything on the episode. It's because I'm so nitpicky on doing it. But thanks again for watching. I hope you like, subscribe, comment. Hopefully next season I'll cut this shit down a bit, try and make it a bit more tighter and out quicker. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.